So, I want you to imagine something for a second. Imagine standing right in the middle of a crowded city square.
Oh, like shoulder to shoulder with people.
Exactly, yeah. Hundreds of people surging around you. The noise is just this constant, dull roar of, conversations and footsteps and traffic.
Right, just total sensory overload.
Yeah, and then suddenly, right in your line of sight, this medical emergency unfolds. A man just collapses right onto the pavement.
Oh, wow.
And, you'd probably assume that with hundreds of capable adults within like a 50-foot radius, help would be basically instantaneous, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, statistically speaking, the odds should be overwhelmingly in the victim's favor there.
Right. But instead, the crowd just completely freezes. Like a literal dead zone forms around this person. Nobody steps forward.
Everyone's just kind of suspended in this eerie collective paralysis.
Yeah, which forces this really deeply uncomfortable question about modern society. Like, why does being surrounded by hundreds of people sometimes make a vulnerable person the absolute most alone?
I mean, it really is one of the more chilling paradoxes of human behavior. Because we naturally assume that a crowd offers safety in numbers, you
Right.
know?
Like a tribal instinct.
Exactly, a tribal instinct to protect the injured. But under the right conditions, a crowd actually creates this total vacuum of responsibility. It just flips our survival instincts completely upside down.
Yeah. And for today's deep dive, we are pulling our source material from a pretty unexpected place to look into this.
We definitely aren't analyzing like a sociology textbook today,
No, not at all. We are actually looking at a raw, translated WhatsApp chat export.
which is fascinating.
It really is. It's this series of messages sent by a woman named Frances, timestamped at like 1:35 in the morning, and she's directing this at a specific loved one.
Middle of the night texts are always intense.
Always. And she recounts this very dramatic, real-life medical emergency she just witnessed in a bustling closet in Madrid. So our mission today is to decode the reality of that crowd in action, talk about this bizarre confrontation she ends up having, and uncover the surprisingly vulnerable reason she felt compelled to text this intense story at that specific time.
Which is great because raw data, like a time-stamped, unfiltered text message, it often gives us a vastly clearer window into human psychology than, say, a polished interview.
Oh, for sure.
Because by 1:35 a.m., the cognitive filters are entirely down. People aren't performing for an audience anymore, you know? They're engaging in a real-time processing of trauma and frustration and fear.
Right, and Frances starts her message by describing this massive crowd just doing absolutely nothing while a man suffers.
Yeah.
And reading her description, it really makes me question the way we talk about public apathy. We throw around the term bystander effect constantly.
Like it's a buzzword.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like, is that a genuine biological hardwiring, or is it just a convenient psychological excuse we've invented for modern callousness? Because sometimes it feels like an easy way to let a crowd off the hook for simply not caring about a dying man.
Well, yeah, it is incredibly tempting to look at a frozen crowd and just judge them as morally bankrupt, right?
Right.
But the bystander effect is rarely rooted in malice or intentional cruelty.
Wait, well,
Yeah, the mechanism driving this is called the diffusion of responsibility. And it's actually, it's basically an arithmetic error in the human brain.
an arithmetic error. How so?
Okay, so if you're walking down an empty country road and you see someone collapse, 100% of the responsibility to intervene falls directly on your shoulders.
Right, because there's literally nobody else.
Exactly. The brain processes that clearly action is required, but put that same brain in a plaza with 500 strangers. Subconsciously, the brain divides the responsibility by 500.
Oh, wow. So it literally does the math.
It does. It calculates that your personal fraction of the burden is effectively zero. And the mind actively starts generating excuses like, someone else is probably a doctor, or someone else has a better phone to call for help, or someone is already handling it.
So the assumption that someone else is stepping up basically guarantees a mathematical certainty that zero people step up.
Exactly.
And the scene Frances paints illustrates this so perfectly. She's in the Plaza del Callao, which is this massive, incredibly dense square in Madrid.
Very busy place.
Super busy. And she mentions to the recipient of her texts that they had actually visited this exact plaza together for an event in the past. It's packed with tourists and locals. And suddenly this police officer falls severely ill
Right out in the open.
right out in the open.
Hmm.
Now, Frances is sitting inside a McDonald's nearby, and she notes that she'd been listening to the commotion for a while. And her first internal reaction is quite revealing.
Yeah, she tells herself she's going to stay calm, right?
Yeah, she explicitly thinks, it's not my problem.
And see, That phrase right there is the ultimate self-defense mechanism of the modern bystander.
Because it lets her off the hook.
Well, telling yourself it's not my problem isn't necessarily about a lack of empathy. It's actually a way to mitigate risk.
Mitigate risk, like legal risk.
Legal risk, physical risk, social risk. Engaging with a medical emergency means taking on the risk of failing. It means getting blood on your clothes or, looking foolish if you misinterpret the whole
Oh,
situation.
that makes sense.
By rationalizing her physical distance inside the restaurant, she is actively trying to suppress a deeper, more primal instinct to help.
It kind of paints a picture of a public emergency acting almost like a theater performance.
Like an audience watching a stage.
Yeah, exactly. Like when an actor forgets their lines on stage, the audience doesn't jump out of their seats to hand them a script. We just sit there in this uncomfortable silence.
Right, waiting for the professionals to handle it.
Yes. Even though anyone in the front row could theoretically stand up and help, there's this invisible barrier. We view ourselves as the audience and the victim, as the performer, and we just wait for the stage manager to fix it.
That's a great analogy.
The crowd in Madrid literally turned into an audience watching a tragedy.
Okay.
But Franica eventually breaks that invisible barrier. So what is the psychological mechanism that finally forces someone out of the safety of the audience and onto the stage?
Well, the catalyst there is a psychological phenomenon known as cognitive dissonance.
Oh, break that down for me.
Sure. So cognitive dissonance is that intense physical and mental discomfort a person feels when they hold two conflicting beliefs or when their behavior contradicts their self-image.
Oh, no.
So on one hand, Frances clearly views herself as a capable, protective person. But on the other hand, her current action is sitting in a fast food restaurant doing absolutely nothing while a man suffers outside.
Right.
The friction between I am a good person and I am watching this happen just creates this immense mental agony.
And that tension has to snap somewhere.
It does. Her tipping point arrives when the negligence of the crowd simply becomes intolerable to her internal moral compass.
Yeah, she writes in her message, pero es que se pasan, which means like they cross the line or they go too far.
Exactly. At that exact moment, the internal pain of being a hypocrite becomes way greater than the external risk of intervening. She basically has to act to relieve her own cognitive dissonance.
And when she snaps, she doesn't just quietly dial emergency services. I mean, she transforms from a passive observer into this aggressive intervener in a matter of seconds.
She really flips a switch.
She notes in her message that she happens to be in uniform, which, by the way, adds a fascinating layer of authority to her mindset, and she storms out of the McDonald's. But she doesn't go straight to the officer.
Right. She has a
A
plan.
very specific tactical plan. She walks into a nearby Taco Bell because she needs a plastic bag to fill with ice. She wants to stabilize the officer while they wait for the ambulance.
It's highly practical, like an immediate solution. The ambulance is delayed, the man is in distress, so she isolates a variable she can actually control, which is getting ice to lower his temperature or manage shock.
But then it goes sideways. She approaches the cashier at the Taco Bell, someone she explicitly notes she has caught in, quote, nonsense before, so there's a pre-existing friction between them.
Right.
She demands a plastic bag for the ice, and the cashier flat out refuses.
I mean, think about that. A medical emergency involving a police officer is unfolding 50 feet from the front doors.
Yep.
A uniformed woman is demanding a profoundly worthless item, a thin plastic bag, to aid in a life-saving effort.
Yeah.
And the response from the employee is a hard no.
The absurdity of that refusal is just staggering. Like, why do petty bureaucratic rules so often override our most basic human survival instincts in a crisis? The man is literally dying on the pavement, and this cashier is essentially guarding the inventory of plastic bags.
Well, we can understand the cashier's behavior by looking at how modern corporate environments condition human beings.
Conditioning, like programming.
Yes, exactly. The cashier is operating under a strict set of programmed protocols. It's very similar to a computer encountering a line of code it wasn't programmed to read.
Oh, I see.
The cashier's brain is running a basic retail protocol. Money comes in, a product goes out, a life or death medical emergency interrupts that loop, but his brain literally doesn't know how to compute the interruption.
Because he doesn't have a button on his register for medical emergency.
Precisely. He doesn't possess the authority to alter the protocol, so he simply defaults to his basic programming. No money, no bag. The immediate, tangible threat of his manager yelling at him for breaking inventory rules feels significantly more real to him than the abstract emergency happening out on the street.
Wow.
It is a catastrophic failure of contextual awareness.
And Frenix's reaction to that failure is explosive. I mean, she throws the ice she already had in her cup straight onto the floor.
Yeah, she loses it.
The intensity of her text messages at this point is wild. She writes that she was waiting for the cashier to come out from behind the counter to insult her because she fully intended to physically fight him
Over a plastic bag.
over a plastic bag. But the rage doesn't even stop at physical violence. She fantasizes about the bureaucratic aftermath. She says she wanted them to take her to the police and she wanted to explain to the doctor and to his honor, meaning the literal judge, what this cashier did. She wants a legal tribunal to condemn this fast food worker.
The scale of that escalation is critical to notice here. She isn't just annoyed about a bag. She is experiencing this deep, righteous fury at the complete breakdown of the social contract.
Right.
And she articulates this brilliantly with a very specific, cutting observation about the crowd hovering around the police officer outside. She writes, to call them, yes. To help them when they are in that situation, no.
Man, that line is devastating. It reveals such an ugly side of how we interact with public servants.
It is a profound critique of how transactional modern society has become. She's observing that the public views authority figures, like police officers, paramedics, firefighters, purely as commodities.
Just a service to be used.
Right. As long as the officer is in uniform and standing upright, the public demands their protection. But the moment the uniform fails, the moment the officer collapses and becomes a vulnerable, sick human being on the pavement, the crowd strips away his humanity.
They just stare at him.
Yeah, the public suddenly sees no obligation to return the favor. The reciprocity of the social contract is entirely broken.
The commodification of a human life just completely disgusts her. But, looking at the evidence, wanting to physically assault the cashier, willing to be arrested, wanting to drag a teenager before a literal judge to answer for his crimes against humanity.
It's intense.
Yeah, the cashier's lack of empathy is frustrating, but her reaction feels apocalyptic. It is entirely out of scale for a plastic bag.
Well, when an emotional reaction appears vastly disproportionate to the immediate trigger, it is a glaring psychological red flag.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning the trigger is almost always a stand-in for a much deeper, unresolved terror. That explosive, apocalyptic anger over fast food ice is a mask.
Oh, wow. Okay.
To understand what that mask is hiding, we actually have to look away from the plaza in Madrid and look at the construction of this communication itself. We have to look at the very first line of her message and the specific person she is sending this to at 1:35 in the morning.
Right, which totally shifts the entire context of the material. We aren't just looking at what happened in that plaza anymore. We have to look at why she is recounting this specific story to this specific loved one in the middle of the night.
Exactly.
Her very first message, the preamble to the entire story, says, "Today I remembered you when you got very sick and there were that bunch of people and none of those who could move did anything."
And that single sentence right there unlocks the entire psychological landscape of the event.
Oh, so?
Well, when Franny's witnessed a vulnerable person, the police officer, surrounded by an unhelpful, apathetic crowd, she wasn't just seeing a stranger in distress. The visual of that frozen crowd instantly triggered a traumatic, deeply emotional association with the person she is texting.
Right, because the recipient of this text message has a history of severe illness. She watched the person she loves go through a terrifying medical ordeal in the past.
Yes.
So when she looks out the window of the McDonald's and sees an indifferent crowd standing over a sick man, she is essentially seeing a ghost. She's watching her own personal nightmare play out in real time.
And that is the absolute power of psychological projection. The human brain uses past trauma as a lens to interpret present events.
Because she loves this person so deeply.
Right, she carries this residual, acute fear of them being vulnerable in a world that just doesn't care about them. The scene in Plaza del Callao served as a terrifying mirror. It reflected what she fears most. The person she loves, vulnerable, sick, and surrounded by a cold society that refuses to lift a single finger to save them.
So her message, "I remembered you when you got very sick and no one did anything." That's her way of communicating how terrified she is of the world's indifference.
Exactly.
She's essentially telling him, "I saw firsthand how cold the world can be, and the thought of you facing that indifference alone keeps me awake at night."
Which completely recontextualizes the frenzy of her intervention, right? Her
Hmm.
storming into the Taco Bell, demanding the ice, fighting the bureaucracy. None of it was purely about saving an anonymous police officer.
It was something more.
It was a physical, desperate manifestation of a wish. By fighting for the officer, she was acting out exactly what she hopes and prays a stranger would do for her loved one if they were ever collapsed in a plaza.
It's like she is trying to balance the karmic scales of the universe by forcing herself to be the one person who steps out of the audience and onto the stage. She's desperately trying to prove to herself that good intervening people still exist in the world.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Because if she can be that person for a stranger, maybe, just maybe, a stranger will be that person for the man she loves.
And that profound vulnerability perfectly explains the apocalyptic rage directed at the Taco Bell cashier.
Right.
Because in France's projected psychological state, the cashier ceases to be a low-wage employee following a store policy. The cashier transforms into an avatar for her ultimate nightmare. The person who possesses the ability to save the man she loves, but simply chooses not to because it's inconvenient.
Wow. So her anger actually has absolutely nothing to do with the plastic bag.
Nothing at all. It is about the terrifying realization that humanity can be needlessly, ruthlessly cold to those who are suffering. She wanted to drag the cashier before a judge because, in her mind, he was guilty of a moral crime against the very humanity she desperately needs to protect her loved one.
So the bystander effect stops being an abstract sociological theory for her in that fast food restaurant.
Right.
It becomes an active, breathing threat to the people she cares about.
It becomes incredibly personal.
When she looks at that crowd, she doesn't see 50 confused tourists.
Mhm.
She sees 50 people who would let her loved one die.
Of course she threw the ice on the floor. Of course she wanted to fight him. The stakes weren't just a sick police officer. The stakes were the fundamental safety of her family in an apathetic world.
I mean, Fran Nagisa's late-night text is just a masterclass in how human beings process fear. It's a raw confession of deep vulnerability disguised entirely as a story of righteous, tactical anger.
It really is.
It highlights how our internal emotional landscapes, our attachments, our fears of loss, our past traumas, completely dictate how we interpret the external world. A busy commercial plaza in Madrid wasn't just a physical location on a map. It became the battleground where she had to fight her own deepest anxieties.
Which is such a profound revelation about how our private fears govern our public interactions.
Yeah.
It really changes the way you look at everyday friction.
And I think that is the ultimate takeaway here. It requires us to turn the lens inward and reflect on our own protective instincts.
Yeah, like consider the times you have felt a sudden explosive surge of disproportionate frustration with a stranger, a driver moving too slowly, an unhelpful customer service representative, a passive bystander blocking an aisle.
We've all been there.
Right. But how often does that sudden rush of anger actually stem from a hidden subconscious fear of how those same strangers might treat your own loved ones if they were ever vulnerable? We are very rarely just reacting to the minor inconvenience in front of us. We are reacting to the terrifying possibilities those moments represent in our minds.
That is an incredibly powerful framework to view society through. I mean, it transforms a crowd of annoying strangers from background characters into a direct reflection of our own internal fears.
It really does.
So next time you witness a crisis, or even just a mundane moment of public apathy, someone dropping their groceries in a crosswalk, or a person struggling to open a heavy door, and you feel that instinct to look away, to rationalize that it's not your problem, and just blend back into the audience, ask yourself a question.
Yeah.
Are your actions being driven by a detached mathematical calculation of civic duty, or by the haunting unspoken question, what if that were someone I loved? Because the answer to that question might be the exact tipping point that finally forces you to step out of the crowd and onto the stage.